The bond was supposed to be unbreakable. The moon goddess's own design, written into your DNA before you were even born. When you meet your fated mate, you don't choose, your wolf chooses. Your body chooses. Your soul chooses. But Carrick chose differently. He looked at Brienna on the altar in her white ceremonial gown, felt the mate bond ignite like fire in his chest, and in that moment, he understood the terrible truth. If he bonded with her, he would destroy her. 7 years later, she walked back into his world wearing an alpha's crown, and the first thing he realized was that his rejection had been both the cruelest thing he'd ever done and the only thing that could have saved her. The second thing he realized was that she would never forgive him for being right. Brienna had dreamed of this moment her entire life. Not in the way weak omegas dream, with fantasy and flowers and soft emotion, but in the way a wolf dreams of its destined path. This was written. This was inevitable. This was the moment the moon goddess had chosen for her before time itself began. The ceremonial hall was packed. Hundreds of pack members from both Valerian and surrounding territories. The grand stone hall glowed with torchlight. Silver ceremonial markings had been painted on the floor. Ancient Nordic runes meant to lock the mate bond in place permanently. Brienna wore white silk that had belonged to the Luna before her, and the Luna before that. Generations of bound mates had worn this gown. It felt like responsibility and destiny wrapped around her shoulders. Carrick stood at the altar. When he looked at her, she felt it, the mate bond activating. It started like warmth in her chest and spread outward, like silver light moving through her veins. Her pale green eyes began to glow faintly with the connection. She could feel him too, could feel everything about him. The hard edges of his personality, the ruthlessness of his mind, the weight of responsibility that had aged him beyond his years. And underneath all of that, she felt his absolute certainty that bonding with her would destroy her. That's when she saw the fear in his eyes. Carrick moved before the ritual could complete. I cannot accept this bond. The hall went silent. Brienna felt the bond begin to tear. It wasn't physical pain exactly. It was like something fundamental inside her was being ripped away. The silver light dimmed. Her knees nearly buckled, but she didn't fall. Carrick's voice continued, and she realized with horrible clarity that every word cost him something. Orion of the Southern Territories has threatened war. Our scouts have confirmed military movement on the borderlands. If I bond with you now, we unite the bloodlines. But Orion won't allow that. He'll attack before the bond can fully lock. Valerian will be destroyed defending a freshly bonded Luna. You'll be bonded to a pack that's actively being slaughtered. And when Valerian falls, and it will fall, you'll feel every death through our bond. You'll carry the weight of every warrior who died because I chose you. He paused. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. I can't do that to you. I won't. Brienna's voice was steady when she spoke. You were supposed to be my forever. I was supposed to be yours. I know, Carrick said, and there were tears on his scarred face. That's why I'm letting you go. Then she turned and walked out of the hall, her white ceremonial gown trailing behind her like a ghost. Behind her, she heard Carrick's voice one more time. Escort her to the borderlands. She's to leave Valerian territory by dawn. Give her supplies. Give her protection to the southern border. And make sure she understands. She's not being exiled because she's unworthy. She's being saved because she is. What Brienna didn't understand in her trauma haze was that Carrick had been right. Orion's threat wasn't exaggerated. In the weeks after her exile, Valerian came under siege. The borderlands burned. Warriors died by the hundreds. Carrick fought like a demon, holding territory with a pack that was falling apart from the inside. If Brienna had been bonded to him at that moment, she would have felt every death through the mate bond. She would have been tied to a pack that was losing. She would have been a liability in battle. Her pain would have divided Carrick's attention at critical moments. In all likelihood, Carrick would have died defending her instead of defending Valerian. Carrick had chosen the agony of separation over condemning her to the agony of bonded loss. He'd chosen wrong for the right reasons. But Brienna didn't know any of this. All she knew was rejection. All she felt was abandonment. Brienna collapsed in Orion's territory barely alive. When Orion found her, he made a choice that seemed like mercy but was actually strategy. He saved her. He healed her. He trained her. And in doing so, he gave her something Carrick never could have. A path that was entirely her own. If Carrick had kept her, she would have been his Luna, powerful but derivative. His protection, not her strength. His kingdom's asset, not her own creation. She would have spent her entire life in his shadow, bonded to him by fate and magic. But Carrick's rejection had broken her into pieces. Those pieces had crystallized into something harder, something real. Orion recognized this the moment he looked at her. And he understood, with the cold clarity of an ancient alpha, that this broken omega could become something more valuable than any Luna. An independent force. A leader. An alpha in her own right. So he saved her not out of pure kindness, but because he saw opportunity. And in saving her, he saved her from a fate worse than death. Being someone else's mate forever. Carrick had been right to let her go. The first thing Orion did when Brienna could walk was take her to the training grounds. "You're broken," he said. Not unkindly, just factual. "I can't fix that. No one can. But I can teach you to be something new." She trained 6 hours a day every day for 2 years. And with every punch she threw, every battle strategy she learned, every moment she endured, she became someone Carrick could never have made her become. She became herself. At age 26, when Orion stepped down and offered her the alpha position, Brienna understood something profound. Carrick's rejection had been the greatest gift he could have given her. Not because the rejection was painless, not because she'd overcome it and become strong, but because the rejection had been the only thing that could have made her strong. If Carrick had bonded with her, she would have been a Luna. Powerful, certainly, but his Luna. Because he rejected her, she became an alpha. Her own strength. And standing there with the crown in her hands, Brienna realized the terrible truth. Carrick had been right to reject her, and she would never forgive him for it. 7 years after the rejection, when Brienna walked into the summit hall wearing an alpha's crown, Carrick looked at her and saw exactly what he'd predicted. She was magnificent. She was powerful. She was everything she could never have become if he'd bonded with her. His rejection had created her. And for a moment, just a moment, Carrick felt something that wasn't pain or regret. He felt pride. Then he felt the mate bond ignite again, and the pride turned to agony. Brienna's pale green eyes met his ice blue ones, and he could see the moment she understood the same thing he understood. His rejection hadn't been cruel. It had been necessary, and that made it infinitely worse. Because if the rejection had been cruel, she could hate him. She could rage against injustice. But if the rejection had been necessary, if it had been the only way to save her, then she was trapped in something worse than grief. She was trapped in the understanding that she owed her existence as an alpha to the man who'd broken her. The negotiation was a formality. They made the alliance. They didn't speak directly to each other. But after, Carrick found her alone in the hallway. "You understand now," he said. "It wasn't a question. Brienna looked at him with eyes that held all 7 years of pain and all 7 years of growth simultaneously. "You let me go so I could become myself," she said quietly. "You were right, and I will never forgive you for being right." Carrick wanted to explain, wanted to say it wasn't a choice, it was the only way, but Brienna said something that stopped him cold. "If you'd kept me, I would have been your Luna. I would have been happy. I would have been loved. I would have been bonded to the man I was fated for. I would have had everything I was promised." She paused. "But I wouldn't have been me. I would have been your mate. And now, looking at what I've become, knowing that I became this because you let me go, I can't decide if your rejection was the most loving thing you've ever done or the most selfish." Carrick opened his mouth to respond, but Brienna continued. "Because here's what I think, Carrick. I think you made the right choice for the wrong reasons. I think you let me go not purely to save me, but because you were afraid. Afraid of what would happen to me if you kept me. Afraid of Orion's war. Afraid of what kind of alpha you'd have to become to keep me safe." "That's not," Carrick started. "Yes, it is," Brienna said flatly. "And I think I made the right choice in becoming alpha for the wrong reasons too. I think I chose power and independence not because I'm noble, but because it let me believe your rejection was a gift instead of a wound. It let me survive the pain by reframing it as salvation." She looked at him with clear, seeing eyes. "So we're both right, and we're both wrong. And we can never be together because our rightness was built on each other's pain." Carrick wanted her back, but Brienna was right. If they bonded now, if they completed what they'd started at the altar, Brienna would have to give up everything she'd built. The alpha position, the southern pack, her independence, all of it would be subsumed into the mate bond. And Carrick couldn't ask her to do that, because asking her to give up her independence would mean destroying the very thing his rejection had created. It would mean erasing 7 years of growth to return to being his Luna. So the mate bond remained between them. Burning, undeniable, impossible to fulfill. Every time they were in the same room, Carrick could feel it pulling at him, demanding completion, screaming for them to finish what they'd started. But they couldn't, because completing the bond would mean one of them had to surrender. And neither of them could do that without destroying the other. The rejection had been necessary, but the necessity had come at a cost that neither of them could ever fully pay. Orion watched Carrick and Brienna circle each other like wolves who recognized each other as threat and family simultaneously. He understood, with the clarity of an ancient alpha, that something had shifted. Brienna was no longer just the Omega he'd saved. She was an alpha in her own right, a threat, but also something more dangerous. She was someone who could make decisions Orion couldn't control. So Orion did what he'd been planning since the moment he decided to step down. He bonded with Brienna, not out of love, not even out of strategy exactly, but because he understood that Brienna needed to belong to someone. And if she was bonded to him, she couldn't be bonded to Carrick. He was solving a problem by creating a different one. And Brienna accepted the bond not because she loved Orion, but because she understood what it meant. Carrick would finally have to let her go. 2 days after Orion's bonding, Sorensen came to find Brienna. "I need to tell you something about the rejection," he said quietly. He told her that Carrick had been right, that Orion's threat was real, that the siege had come exactly as Carrick predicted, that Valerian would have fallen if Carrick had been divided by a newly bonded Luna. "He saved you," Sorensen said, "and he did it by being cruel, by letting you believe he didn't want you when the truth was he wanted you so badly, he was willing to die instead of condemning you to his war. Brienna listened to this and felt something inside her shift. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. "He was right," she said finally. "And I've spent 7 years building a life that only existed because he was right. If he'd kept me, I'd be his Luna. If he'd abandoned me without reason, I'd be dead. There's no version of this story where we both survive intact. He chose the only way that let me live as myself." Months later, when the alliance between Valerian and the South was formalized, Brienna and Carrick stood across from each other at the treaty signing. The mate bond was still there, still burning, still demanding completion, but they both understood now what completion would cost. Brienna would lose her alpha position. Carrick would lose his independence. One of them would have to subsume into the other, and there was no way to do that without destroying what the rejection had created. So they made a choice together. They would not complete the bond. They would let it burn. They would let it hurt. They would spend the rest of their lives feeling the weight of what could have been and accepting that what could have been would have destroyed what actually became. "I'm sorry," Carrick said, and he meant it. Not for the rejection, but for the necessity of it. "I know," Brienna said, "and I'm sorry I couldn't forgive you for being right." "Maybe," Carrick said quietly, "that's the truest version of this story, that we were both right. And right isn't always something you can forgive." Brienna had learned that sometimes the right choice destroys you in ways you don't understand until years later. That Carrick's rejection wasn't a tragedy. It was the only way to save her. But understanding that didn't make the scar hurt any less. The mate bond between them would never fully heal. It would burn for the rest of their lives. A reminder that sometimes destiny asks you to refuse destiny. That sometimes the most loving thing is the cruelest thing. That sometimes being right is the worst punishment of all. And standing there, feeling the bond pull at her even as she stood bonded to Orion, even as she wore an alpha's crown she'd earned herself, Brienna finally understood Carrick's true gift. He'd given her the chance to become herself. And the price of that gift was that she could never be his. If you want to discover what happens when both choices are right, when fated bonds become impossible, when the only way to save someone is to destroy them, when respect is the cruelest form of love, subscribe now. Because this is a story about two people who made the right choice and spent the rest of their lives paying for it.